Story 1. The dark web delivery. The box was supposed to contain weed, nothing more, but the man standing at my door wore sunglasses at 9 o'clock at night, and that was the first sign something had gone terribly wrong. My name is Charlie, and back when I was younger, I used to smoke quite a bit of marijuana, though after a while, it became dull and repetitive, like watching the same movie over and over until the plot loses all meaning. I told myself I'd never try anything harder, never venture beyond the familiar territory of regular weed purchased from people I knew. But my friend Christine had other ideas. She approached me at school one afternoon with this excited gleam in her eyes, telling me she had heard the best quality product came from the dark web, that place everyone whispered about, but few actually dared to explore. I knew bits and pieces about the deep web and the dark web, understood they were different layers of the internet most people never accessed, but I assumed drug transactions belong more to the deep web, the gray area between normal browsing and truly illegal territory. Maybe I didn't know as much as I thought. Christine contacted me later that week and informed me she had already placed an order on my behalf, which struck me as presumptuous, but I didn't object because curiosity had already taken root in my mind. About a week passed, 7 days during which I almost forgot about the whole thing, until that Friday night when I found myself home alone, parents out on one of their rare date nights, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. The knock at the door came suddenly, 3 sharp raps that made me jump slightly. I approached cautiously and peered through the peephole, seeing a man dressed entirely in black, a Yankees cap pulled low over his forehead, sunglasses covering his eyes despite the darkness outside, and in his hands he held a cardboard box. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. No legitimate delivery service operated at this hour. No normal person wore sunglasses at night unless they were trying to conceal their identity. I remained silent, hoping he would simply leave the package and walk away, assuming I wasn't home. I pulled out my phone and called Christine, asking her how long the delivery was supposed to take, and she confirmed it had been about a week, which meant this could potentially be the package. I described the man at my door, the strange timing, the unsettling appearance, and asked if this was normal for dark web deliveries. She seemed confused, uncertain, asking why someone would be standing outside my door with weed, why they wouldn't just leave it and go. Then I heard his voice, muffled through the door but clear enough. "Hey, Charlie, I have your package. I know you're home. I see you through the window." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I spun around and there he was, no longer at the front door but standing on my back porch, face pressed against the sliding glass door. Those dark sunglasses pointed directly at me, head circled around the house, moved from front to back because I hadn't answered, and now he was trying the door handle, testing it, seeing if it would open. I told Christine what was happening, my voice shaking, and she said to call the police immediately. I hung up and dialed emergency services, explaining the situation as calmly as I could while this stranger continued rattling the back door, his face expressionless behind those glasses, his movements methodical and patient. I ran out of his line of sight, pressing myself against a wall in the hallway, hearing him move around outside, trying windows, testing locks. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, though it felt like hours, and by then the man had vanished into the darkness. Quite amusing how people think anonymity protects them, isn't it? How they believe a username and encryption make them invisible, untouchable, safe from consequence. The box sat on my back porch where Head left it, and when the officers opened it in front of me, there was nothing inside except crumpled paper and a message written in black marker across the cardboard interior. "You're lucky." Those 2 words carried more weight than any threat could have, suggesting that something terrible had been planned, something it narrowly avoided through pure chance, or perhaps because the police sirens had scared him away before he could execute whatever had come to do. The officers asked me questions about the dark web order, about Christine, about whether I had any enemies or anyone who might want to harm me, but I had no answers that made sense. I was just a teenager who wanted to try some supposedly higher quality weed, nothing more, nothing sinister, yet somehow he'd ended up on the receiving end of what felt like a targeted attack. After the police left, after they'd filed their report and told me to call if anything else happened, I sat alone in my house with all the lights on, staring at that empty box, trying to understand what had just occurred. The man knew my name. He knew where I lived, had tracked me to the back of the house, watched me through windows, waited patiently for an opportunity. This wasn't a simple delivery gone wrong. This was something planned, something deliberate. I called Christine the next day and told her I never wanted to speak to her again. She protested, claimed she had no idea what had happened, insisted she had only been trying to help, but I couldn't trust her anymore. Couldn't shake the feeling that she'd set me up, that she'd given my address to someone dangerous, that she'd known exactly what would happen when that man arrived at my door. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she was innocent and had simply made a terrible mistake by trusting the wrong vendor, the wrong connection in that shadowy digital marketplace where identity means nothing and intentions are impossible to verify. But I couldn't take that chance. Trust, once broken, becomes impossible to repair. Like trying to put together a shattered mirror where the pieces no longer fit quite right and you can see the cracks, no matter how carefully you arrange them. I never touched the dark web again after that night. Whenever someone brings it up in conversation, mentions the deep web or talks about anonymous browsing or encrypted marketplaces, I either change the subject or go completely silent, because that experience taught me that some doors are better left unopened. Some curiosities better left unsatisfied. The really terrifying part wasn't what happened, but what didn't happen. What might have occurred if Id opened that front door, if Id let him inside, if the police had arrived 5 minutes later. The box was empty except for paper and those 2 words, but what was supposed to be inside? What had I ordered without knowing? What transaction had Christine actually made in my name? I spent weeks afterward jumping at every unexpected sound, checking windows obsessively before going to sleep, looking through the peephole multiple times before opening my door for anyone. My parents never understood why I suddenly became so paranoid, why I insisted on keeping curtains closed and doors locked, even during the day. How could I explain that it invited danger into our home through my own stupidity, through my casual curiosity about something I should have left alone? The man in the sunglasses never came back, at least not that I know of. But sometimes late at night I wonder if he's still out there, if he remembers my name and address, if he's waiting for another opportunity, or if he's moved on to some other victim, some other teenager, foolish enough to think the dark web was just a place to buy drugs. You're lucky, the box said, and I was incredibly lucky. But luck runs out eventually, doesn't it? And the next person might not have a friend who tells them to call the police, might not have officers who arrive in time, might open their door and let the monster inside. Story 2.
Santa.
The moment my daughter sat on his lap, I knew something was wrong. Something fundamentally broken behind those pale blue eyes that stared at her with an intensity no department store Santa should possess. My name doesn't matter to this story, but my daughter's does, because he learned it somehow, used it against us, turned a simple Christmas tradition into a nightmare that still wakes me in the middle of the night years later. Juniper was 4 years old that December, old enough to understand Christmas and Santa Claus, but young enough to believe in the magic completely, without question or cynicism. We'd gone to the mall for some holiday shopping, just the 2 of us, because my husband was working a double shift, and when Juniper saw Santa sitting in his elaborate throne in the center atrium, surrounded by fake snow and mechanical reindeer, she started jumping up and down with pure joy. The line was enormous, snaking around velvet ropes for what looked like at least an hour's wait. But her excitement was contagious, and I couldn't deny her this moment. So we stood in line, inching forward slowly, while children cried and parents checked their phones and Christmas music played endlessly through overhead speakers. When we finally reached the front and Juniper climbed onto Santa's lap, I raised my camera to take the obligatory photo. But then I looked at his face and felt my stomach drop. His eyes were too wide, pupils dilated like he was on some kind of substance, and he wasn't looking at Juniper the way Santa looks at children in general, that jolly indifference professionals maintain when dealing with hundreds of kids per day. He was studying her, memorizing her features, his gloved hands holding her waist just a fraction too tightly. She told him what she wanted for Christmas, a doll house and some books, speaking in that earnest way children do when they believe they're talking to someone magical, someone who can make wishes come true. He listened, nodded, but his gaze never softened, never took on that warm, grandfatherly quality you expect from mall Santas. After about 2 minutes, that felt like 20. He lifted her off his lap, and as we turned to leave, he winked at her. Not a friendly wink, but something else, something that made my skin crawl. "Merry Christmas, Juniper," he said, and only later did I realize it never told him her name, never mentioned it while we waited in line or when she sat down. We moved through the mall doing our shopping, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest like a stone. I kept looking over my shoulder, checking behind displays and around corners, that maternal instinct screaming that danger was close. About 30 minutes later, while browsing through a clothing store, I glanced up and saw him through the window, the mall Santa, sitting on a bench directly outside, still in full costume, watching the entrance. Our eyes met for just a second before I grabbed Juniper's hand and pulled her toward the store's back exit, my heart pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. We wandered the mall for another hour, trying to finish our shopping, trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that he was probably just on a break and happened to be sitting there by coincidence. But mothers know, don't we? We sense threats to our children the way animals sense earthquakes before they happen. Some primitive part of our brain that evolution hardwired for survival. If you think being paranoid makes you foolish, consider that the alternative is being unprepared when something terrible actually happens. We decided to grab lunch at the food court before heading home, and I chose a table with clear sightlines in every direction, positioning myself so I could see anyone approaching. Juniper ate her chicken nuggets happily, completely unaware of my vigilance, and we were almost finished when I saw him walking toward us, weaving between tables, that red suit unmistakable even in the crowded space. He came right up to our table, bent down to Juniper's eye level, and in that deep, jolly voice said, Hey there, Juniper. Remember to be good so Santa can come and bring you lots of presents." The people around us smiled and laughed, charmed by what they saw as a dedicated mall employee, going above and beyond to spread Christmas cheer. But I saw the truth in his eyes, the hunger, the obsession, the careful calculation of a predator who'd selected his prey and was now circling closer. I wanted to scream, wanted to grab Juniper and run, but I was frozen by the social contract we all unconsciously follow, the rules that say you don't make a scene in public, don't overreact, don't embarrass yourself by treating Santa Claus like a threat in front of dozens of witnesses who would think you were insane. So I smiled tightly, took Juniper's hand, told her it was time to go, and walked away with measured steps when every cell in my body wanted to sprint. She waved goodbye to Santa, thrilled that Head remembered her name and come to see her specially, while I calculated the fastest route to our car and whether I should call my husband or the police or both. That night I told my husband everything, described the way the Santa had looked at our daughter, the coincidental appearance outside the clothing store, the approach at the food court, and most importantly the fact that he knew her name when we'd never introduced ourselves. My husband was angry, wanted to go back to the mall and confront the man, but he also understood my decision not to cause a scene, agreed that traumatizing Juniper by ripping her away from Santa screaming would have created its own kind of damage. We decided to stay vigilant, to keep her close, to hope it was just a creepy coincidence and nothing more. The next morning I woke around 8, got Juniper breakfast, went about our normal routine, and happened to glance out the front window where I noticed a blue sedan parked on our street that I'd never seen before. This didn't immediately alarm me because it could have belonged to anyone. A visitor to a neighbor's house, someone who lived on the next block over, any number of innocent explanations. But something made me keep checking, made me look out that window every half hour or so. And by 11 o'clock, the car was still there. Hadn't moved an inch, just sitting empty in the exact same spot. I decided to walk out to the mailbox, use that as an excuse to get closer and examine the vehicle without being too obvious about it. The car was indeed empty except for the passenger seat where a red Santa hat lay draped across the upholstery. And that's when the pieces clicked together in my mind with horrifying clarity. I ran back inside and called my husband immediately, told him about the car and the hat, and while he said I might be jumping to conclusions that lots of people own Santa hats this time of year, he also decided to come home early, just to be safe. A few minutes after we hung up, I looked out the window again and saw him, the mall Santa, sitting in the driver's seat, pointing his phone at our house, taking pictures. When he noticed me watching, he started the engine and drove away fast enough that I couldn't get the license plate number, couldn't get any identifying information beyond the make and color of the vehicle. My husband arrived 20 minutes later and I explained what I'd witnessed, showed him where the car had been parked, and we called the police together this time, filed a report, even though the officer said there wasn't much they could do without a license plate or concrete evidence of a crime. I felt helpless and furious, trapped by a system that required victims to wait until something actually happened before offering protection. My husband stayed home from work the next day, and around noon we did a perimeter check of the house, walking around outside to make sure everything looked secure, and that's when we found them. Footprints in the snow outside Juniper's bedroom window, leading from the street to the glass and back again. Prints that neither of us had made, that had appeared sometime in the night while we slept. Someone had stood there in the darkness, looking into our daughter's room, watching her sleep, and we'd been completely unaware just a few feet away behind our own bedroom wall. That night, none of us could sleep properly. We set up a camping arrangement in the living room, told Juniper we were having an adventure, made it seem fun so she wouldn't be scared, but my husband and I were both terrified, both listening for any sound that didn't belong.
What's that sound?
Shortly after midnight, we heard it, a car engine approaching slowly, and when we looked out with the lights off, we saw the blue sedan pull up and park directly in front of our house. The mall Santa got out carrying a large canvas bag over his shoulder, the kind that looks like Santa's toy sack and Christmas illustrations, and he walked straight toward our house with purpose, with confidence, like he had every right to be there. Story 3. The Storm Night Visitor. I was 10 years old the first time I stayed home alone, and that was the night I learned that darkness has weight, that silence has texture, that fear can become so physical you taste it like copper on your tongue. This happened in 2004, back when cell phones weren't ubiquitous and parents still trusted their children to survive a few hours without supervision, back when the world felt simultaneously safer and more mysterious than it does now. My parents were going out for their anniversary dinner, something they rarely did because money was tight and babysitters cost more than they wanted to spend. So when I insisted I was old enough to stay by myself, they reluctantly agreed. I was excited initially, felt grown up and responsible, planned to watch some horror movies I'd rented from Blockbuster and play Manhunt on my PlayStation 2, that controversial game everyone's parents said would rot our brains and turn us violent. My parents left around 6 in the evening, told me they'd be back by 10, left emergency numbers on the refrigerator, gave me all the standard warnings about not answering the door and not using the stove. I waved them off confidently, locked the door behind them, and settled onto the couch with my snacks and video games, king of my own castle for a few precious hours. The storm rolled in around 7:30, one of those sudden summer tempests that turn the sky green and make the air feel electric. I wasn't particularly worried because storms were common where we lived, but this one was violent. Thunder cracking so loudly the windows rattled, lightning illuminating the living room in stark white flashes. It turned on every light in the house because despite loving horror movies, I was still a 10-year-old kid with an overactive imagination, and the brightness made me feel safer, more in control. Then the power went out, plunging everything into absolute darkness except for the occasional lightning flash, and suddenly my confidence evaporated like water on hot pavement. I grabbed my flashlight from the coffee table where Id fortunately left it and ran into the living room near the front of the house, thinking maybe I could see the neighbors' lights, confirmed this was just a neighborhood outage and not something specific to our house, but their windows were dark too. The storm had knocked out power to the whole block. I climbed onto the couch and pulled a blanket over myself, not for warmth, because it was summer and humid, but for that illusory protection blankets provide, that childish belief that fabric can shield you from danger. I tried to fall asleep, figured if I could just unconscious until my parents returned everything would be fine, but fear kept me awake, kept my heart racing and my breathing shallow. I don't know what made me peek out from under the blanket, what instinct or sound prompted me to look.
Who's there?
But when I did, I saw it clearly in the dim gray light filtering through the windows. The silhouette of a man standing in the corner of the room, perfectly still, watching me. My rational mind tried to explain it away, told me it was just a coat rack or a shadow or my imagination playing tricks, but the shape was too distinctly human, too perfectly proportioned, and as I stared it seemed to shift slightly, to breathe. I yanked the blanket back over my head, squeezed my eyes shut, tried to unhear what I was hearing, but the sounds were unmistakable. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the hardwood floor toward the couch where I hid. Each step seemed to take forever, a pause between each footfall, like whoever was walking wanted me to anticipate their arrival, wanted me to count down to the moment they reached me. Then came the whispering, words I couldn't quite make out, syllables that sounded wrong, like a language that shouldn't exist, or a voice that hadn't spoken in centuries. The footsteps continued their methodical approach, closer and closer, and I was paralyzed under that blanket, unable to move or scream or do anything except wait for whatever was coming to arrive. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might actually break through my ribcage, thought I might die right there from fear alone before anything even touched me. Then the sounds stopped completely. No more footsteps, no more whispering, just absolute silence that was somehow worse than the noise had been, because now I didn't know where the presence was, couldn't track its location, couldn't prepare myself. Perhaps you think childhood fears are irrational, that monsters aren't real and shadows are just absence of light, but try telling that to a 10-year-old alone in a dark house during a storm when something that shouldn't exist is hunting them. I stayed frozen under that blanket for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, my breath coming in short gasps that I tried to muffle because I didn't want whatever was in the room to hear me breathing, to know exactly where I was, even though logically it had watched me climb under the blanket and obviously knew my location. The silence stretched and stretched, becoming its own kind of torture, and finally, curiosity or stupidity, or maybe just the human need to see our doom approaching, made me shift slightly, preparing to peek out again. That's when I felt it. A hand, cold even through the blanket, pressing against my arm, fingers wrapping around my bicep with gentle but undeniable pressure, and a voice, clear now, no longer whispering, but speaking directly into my ear through the fabric, said one word: go. I didn't think, didn't question, didn't pause to grab my flashlight or my shoes or anything else. I just exploded from under that blanket and ran like something was chasing me, because something was, I could feel it behind me, could sense its presence the way you sense someone staring at you from across a room. I bolted through the dark house, bouncing off furniture I couldn't see, the blanket still tangled around me like a cape, and I hit the front door hard, fumbled with the lock, got it open and threw myself outside into the storm. Rain pelted me immediately, soaking through my clothes in seconds, but I didn't stop, didn't slow down, just ran across the lawn toward the neighbor's house, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, who were elderly and kind and whose lights I could see glowing through their windows like beacons of salvation. I pounded on their door, probably scared them half to death, and when Mrs. Patterson opened it and saw me standing there drenched and gasping and wrapped in a blanket, she pulled me inside immediately and asked what happened. I tried to explain, between sobs, told her about the silhouette and the footsteps and the whispering and the hand that touched me, told her someone was in my house and she had her husband call the police while she wrapped me in dry towels and tried to calm me down. The police arrived before my parents did, searched our house thoroughly with their flashlights, checked every room and every closet and every possible hiding place, but found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been inside, no footprints or disturbances or proof that my story was anything more than a child's overactive imagination, amplified by fear and darkness. When my parents finally got home, delayed by the storm and bad traffic. They found me at the Pattersons' house, found police cars in our driveway, found their son, who'd been so confident about staying alone, now traumatized and refusing to go back inside until every light was on and they checked everywhere twice. My father seemed angry, not at me but at the situation, at himself for leaving me alone, at the universe for allowing his child to be so terrified. My mother just held me and didn't say anything, didn't tell me it was my imagination or that I was safe now, because maybe she understood that whatever it experienced, real or not, had fundamentally changed something in me. The power came back on around 2 in the morning, and we all went home together, my parents flanking me like bodyguards, and I slept in their bed that night because I couldn't face my own room, couldn't face being alone in the dark ever again. To this day, more than 15 years later, I still don't know what happened that night, whether there was actually someone in the house who escaped before police arrived, whether it was some kind of hallucination brought on by fear and adrenaline, whether my mind created the entire experience as a manifestation of being alone for the first time. The rational part of me, the adult I've become, wants to believe it was imagination, wants to dismiss it as childhood terror given form by darkness and storm and too many horror movies. But I remember with absolute clarity how that hand felt on my arm. Remember the weight and temperature and pressure of those fingers. Remember that voice saying go with such authority and urgency, like it was warning me, like something else was coming that was worse than whatever had touched me. Sometimes late at night, when I'm alone, I wonder if I was actually in danger that evening, if something malevolent had entered our house during the storm, and the touch I felt was something trying to save me from it, telling me to run before it was too late. Other times I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if the silhouette was just a coat rack and the footsteps were the house settling and the touch was my own hand moving in my sleep. But I still sleep with a light on, still check corners and closets before bed, still feel that primal fear rise up when I'm alone in the dark, because whether it was real or imagined, the terror was genuine, and terror leaves scars that never fully heal. If you're still awake after hearing these stories, if you're lying in bed right now, listening to every creak and groan your house makes, wondering what's standing in your dark corners, then maybe you understand what I learned that night, that being afraid doesn't make you a child. It makes you aware, makes you realize that the world contains things we can't explain, presences we can't see, dangers that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. Like if you're still awake, subscribe so it doesn't return tomorrow. And tell me, what was written on the box that the dark web stalker left on Charlie's porch, the exact words that saved his life? The first person to answer correctly will receive a small reward from me, the storyteller tonight, as a way of saying thank you for watching and supporting. Also, drop a comment telling me your local time and where you're watching from right now. I want to know who's brave enough to listen to these stories in the dead of night. The darkness is patient, and it always returns for those who survive it once.